Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's installment of the Learning Event Series, which aims to discuss the proposed Dumaguete City Reclamation Project. Tonight's topic will cover the geopolitical and security implications of the proposed Dumaguete City Reclamation Project. Before we proceed any further, just a few reminders for our participants. These house rules have already been flashed on screen, but if you are just tuning in, I would like to remind you that this is a view-only webinar, and participants' microphones are permanently on mute. Also, the raise hand button is permanently disabled. But if you have any questions, you may type your questions in the Q&A box. Or if you are tuning in via Facebook Live, you may also write your questions on the comment section. And the questions which the participants will be asking will be entertained at the end of the presentation. This learning event series is brought to you by Dumaguete City Host Lions Club and the Rotary Club of Dumaguete South. And tonight's speaker is Attorney Jose Ramon Nakao, who is a Silliman alumnus and a former professor at the College of Law. He is also a former prosecutor for the City Prosecution Office of Dumaguete City. And most recently, he authored a fictional spy novel entitled Fire Dragon. Attorney Nakao, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Floyd, and good evening to our viewers. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak, which is very timely. And this is a new topic, and we hope that we could shed light on it. Okay? So before we proceed, let me be very clear. I am not an expert in national security or in international relations. I'm just a keen observer who did a little research on the topic when I was writing my book, and it's sort of a preoccupation for me. Okay, so I've prepared a short presentation, and I'm going now to my presentation that I'm going now to my short presentation. Okay. Okay, so good evening again. On July 30, 2021, the mayor of Dumaguete City admitted on national TV that Poli Changda, which is a Chinese state-owned engineering company, is EM Cuerpo's subcontractor to undertake the reclamation of the proposed smart city. Now, this is very significant. Okay. One of the selling points for the smart city is that it will have 5G capable communication networks. Given that Poli Changda is a Chinese state-owned company, chances are, and we will explain that later on because it is required under Chinese law, chances are the so-called smart city will be using 5G communications hardware from Chinese companies that have already been banned and blacklisted by the United States and other liberal democracies due to security concerns. Okay. Now, before we go further, let me have a short explanation of what is 5G. It is the next platform. It is the next internet platform, which is at least 20 times faster than the fastest 4G network. It enables the so-called Internet of Things, which is everyday items with built-in sensors that are communicating independently. Now consider your car, if you bought it probably after 2011. Now that automobile has a built-in chip for mechanical diagnosis. So if you notice, if you take your car to the garage and have it serviced, the first thing that the mechanic would do is plug it in a computer and to try to see what's wrong with it. Okay. With 5G, that sensor in your car will be communicating to an internet node, and probably it would have the capability of uploading your travel itinerary, among others, without your knowledge. Okay? That's why security features and reliability of the hardware is very important with 5G. Now, if you recall, former President Donald Trump has blacklisted Huawei. And Huawei is China's champion and the world's leading provider of 5G telecommunications equipment. Okay. Of course, we know that Trump lost, and then we have a new American president. But to the surprise of most security analysts and international law observers, the blacklist on Huawei and other Chinese companies was pursued and even expanded by the new president, Joe Biden. And this has been echoed by like-minded countries like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, Japan, Taiwan, India, and most of NATO. Okay? The reason for this is 5G is so critical to national security. Okay? So why is this concerning for us? Why worry? Note that under the Memorandum of Understanding which the city had with its contractor, EM Cuerpo, under that MOU, the city will have no say as to who will be laying out the 5G telecommunications hardware. Under Section 3 of that MOU, under the heading Scope of Work, wireless communication networks are included in the so-called ancillary business of the smart city. And under Section 4.2, paragraph G of that same MOU, it says that ancillary businesses will be managed exclusively by the private partner and not the city. With that in mind, whoever would be running the ancillary business would be laying out and managing and controlling the 5G infrastructure. Okay. Now, in the previous learning event which we had with Attorney Golda Benjamin, she discussed that EM Cuerpo has no capacity to do the reclamation work and even build the so-called smart city. This work will be done by Poli Changda, okay, as admitted by the city mayor. And this will include the critical task of laying out the 5G infrastructure. Now, in my succeeding slides, I'll point out that since Poli Changda is a Chinese state-owned company, it is obliged under Chinese law to comply with the National Intelligence Law of 2017. And because of that, it will be using banned technologies from companies that are already blacklisted by the United States, Great Britain, and other liberal democracies. Okay? But before we go into that, we need to examine who or what is Poli Changda. Poli Changda is a state-owned Chinese company that is based in Guangdong, China. Now, because it is state-owned, it means that it is owned in reality by the Chinese Communist Party. It is a subsidiary of the Poli Group Corporation. Okay. If you recall, in 2017, the Poli Group Corporation filed a letter of intent to supply arms to the AFP. Now, Poli Group Corporation has been flagged by Amnesty International as one of the biggest arms exporters to countries like Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zimbabwe, among others. But their portfolio is diverse. They own auction houses while also grant low-interest loans to authoritarian regimes in exchange for concessions and government projects. Now, the reason for this diverse portfolio is that in China, it's very common to have a fusion of civil and military affairs. So you could have a corporation, a civilian corporation, but more than half of the board would either be active or past members of the People's Liberation Army. For example, you have Huawei. Okay? It is a civilian corporation, but if you look at the founder and the members of the board, they are either past or active members of the People's Liberation Army. But why should this worry us? Why should this relationship between Poly Changda and Poly Group Corporation worry us? After all, in corporation law, a subsidiary has a separate and distinct personality from its parent corporation. Now, it is worrisome because as a state-owned Chinese corporation, Poly Changda and Poly Group Corporation are both obliged under Chinese law to comply with the National Intelligence Law of the People's Republic of China. So let's discuss this particular law, which is the National Intelligence Law of 2017. Now, this was passed in response to the protests in Hong Kong. If you recall, the Communist Party of China was really rattled because they considered those protests as an existential threat to its very survival. Now, there are two very salient provisions under this law that is very concerning, and it involves all of us. It involves Poly Changda, Poly Group Corporation, and it affects us as well. Now, the first provision is Article 7. Okay? If you look at Article 7, it says, all organizations and citizens shall support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence efforts in accordance with law, and shall protect national intelligence work secrets that they are aware of. Note the tone and language of this particular law. It commands all citizens and organizations, including corporations, to support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence. Now, what does this mean for us? It means that if Poly Changda will be laying out the 5G infrastructure, it is required to pass on vital, classified, and personal information to the Chinese state. All information that passes through their network, okay? Like private communications between parties, phone communication between private individuals, bank records, credit card transactions. If demanded by the Chinese state, Poly Changda will have no recourse but to comply because of the requirement under this law. And this is not the first time that a Chinese corporation has done this, and we will be discussing this later on. Okay? We will be examining this later on with a specific example wherein a Chinese corporation built a building for an international body and emplaced listening devices in it. Okay? Okay, so as I've said, Chinese corporations have no choice but to follow the clear mandate of the National Intelligence Law. Now let's go to the next provision. And that is Article 10. Under Article 10, it requires national intelligence agencies to use necessary means, tactics, and channels to carry out intelligence operations here and abroad. Okay, so it is actually a directive and a mandate on Chinese intelligence agencies to carry out intelligence efforts. Okay, as I've said, later on in this presentation, we will be giving an example wherein a Chinese corporation was compelled to comply with this at the behest of China's intelligence agency. Okay. So since Poly Changda is obliged to support national intelligence, they will also be required to install 5G telecommunications equipments from corporations like Huawei, which has already been blacklisted and banned by liberal democracies. If you recall, Huawei was already banned by the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, Huawei was banned at first by former President Trump. And it's easy for you to say that it was part of the rivalry between the US and China. But that ban was echoed by other like-minded countries. And as I've said, Australia and New Zealand, okay? I lived in New Zealand for almost 10 years, and I can tell you, Kiwis, that's what we call ourselves, Kiwis, because I hold two nationalities. I'm both a Filipino and I also hold New Zealand citizenship. Kiwis, as we call ourselves, we hate Americans. Yet, New Zealand and Australia, they have followed through and echoed the ban that was instituted by the United States on Huawei and all these Chinese corporations. Now, why is this alarming for us? It is alarming because Polychangda will not be bound by our courts. It has no choice but to follow their own national law. And we also cannot seek redress from Chinese courts because there is no mechanism or judicial remedy against their security apparatus, like the Ministry for State Security or the People's Liberation Army. Okay? Unlike our courts, Chinese courts cannot issue injunction or enjoin the actions of their security apparatus. Okay? On the other hand, our courts can always issue injunctive writs and orders like habeas corpus, habeas data, or writ of amparo. And these will all enjoin the AFP, for instance, or the PNP, or the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, enjoin them from their actions if there is a violation of a person's civil liberties. There is no equivalent under Chinese law. It is for this reason that the reason that Chinese courts are not independent like ours or other liberal democracies. It is for this reason that liberal democratic countries have banned Huawei, ZTE, and other Chinese companies from operating within their borders. The United States have expanded this ban and blacklisted more than 59 Chinese companies. And this has also been broadened given Beijing's military-civil fusion strategy. Now, this broadening and expansion covers Poly Group Company. And by implication, it would cover all subsidiaries like Polychangda. Now, this, as I've said, this ban, these are the slide that I'm showing you, these are the countries that have echoed the ban instituted by the US. So if you look at it, it is the Five Eyes Alliance, which is a group of countries consisting of New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US. Or there's another group known as the Quad, which is Japan, India, Australia, and the US, and other EU countries as well. Okay, so it's not only the US who has banned Chinese 5G companies. Okay. Now let's go to a specific example and China's track record, which I've said earlier. Okay, I'm citing a specific instance wherein a Chinese company built a modern building for an international body and installed listening devices and computer malware all at the behest of Chinese intelligence. Okay, one such example is when they built the African Union Center and Office complex in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Okay, so that is the building, the one in the slide, that is the building that China built in 2012. Supposedly, it was their gift to the entire African continent. It is a modern building, a modern complex with state-of-the-art conference rooms and computer systems. China wanted to present it as an example of their growing soft power. But something happened in 2017, just barely 5 years after it was turned over to the African Union. Okay. Now, in 2017, the African Union's IT department discovered that the computer systems were connecting every night to servers based in Shanghai. And the computer systems were uploading African Union files and recordings from microphones embedded within the walls and furnitures in the building. Okay. Now, the building's computer system were subsequently removed by the African Union, and they refused a Chinese offer to reconfigure the system, but this was later covered up to protect Chinese interests in the African continent. Okay. So the African Union building is actually a Trojan horse, and we could have one within our own backyard. But there is also another more important reason why China is so determined and so adamant to gain a full foothold right at our doorstep. And this has everything to do with the strategic nature of the Tanjung Strait. Okay, the map that I'm going to show you is actually prepared by the US Geospatial Intelligence Agency. It is an intelligence agency tasked with collecting data and information relating to Earth locations. Okay, the map is part of the US Navy's sailing direction, and it is one of their most important and strategic archipelagic routes from Guam to the South China Sea. Okay, so if you look at this is Negros Island. If you look at this route over here, okay, I'm tracing it with my mouse. I hope you can see it. Okay. This route passes through the southern tip of Negros and has the Surigao Strait over here in the east and the Balabac Strait in Palawan in the north. Sorry, west. Okay. So you have the Balabac Strait towards the west. Now, if you recall, remember in 2001, right after 9/11, there was a US Navy Chinook helicopter that got lost near Apo Island. So the ship that particular helicopter was servicing was actually passing through this route. Okay. Now, my next slide is actually just a snip of Google Maps. And this will show you the relative importance between this map, this particular route that passes through the southern tip of Negros, to US Navy bases in Guam and their maritime assets in the Pacific. Okay, so this is just a snip from Google Maps. So this is Guam, where the US has all their maritime assets. This is actually the route that I was pointing to. That is Negros Island. Okay. So if you look at this, you'll see that this particular passage presents a straight line from Guam and the Pacific towards the South China Sea. Okay. Now, the Americans cannot go straight up here. They cannot go to the north because that is near Taiwan, and that is where near Taiwan, okay? And that is where China's anti-access and area denial weapon systems are concentrated. That may probably include their DF-21 and DF-26 missiles, which the media has referred to as aircraft carrier killers. Okay? They need to pass through this particular route, and they have been using that even before World War II. Okay? That is part of the US Navy's sailing directions. Okay? Now, going back to Polichangda, remember that Polichangda is required by Chinese law to support national intelligence. Intelligence would include tracking American surface ships and submarines passing through this particular route from Guam and the Pacific through the southern tip of Negros Island. Okay? Intelligence would include underwater mapping for anti-submarine warfare. Remember that the Tanyon Strait is a very deep, deep body of water, very ideal for submarine passage. Okay? Intelligence would also include the laying out of underwater sonobuoys and mines. Okay? So you might ask yourself, is Polichangda capable of doing this? And the answer is yes. It will have the perfect cover to gather intelligence, because it is a fact that whenever a company is doing oceanographic survey or laying out marine engineering works, those ships are actually serving as intelligence platforms. China is not the only country doing that. Every country with an advanced navy, they're doing that. France, the US, Australia, they're all doing that. Maritime engineering ships and oceanographic ships also serve as intelligence platform. Okay. Now, take note that Polichangda's ships will be doing those surveys within the Tanyon Strait, which is just basically a stone's throw from this particular archipelagic route. Their ships will be in this area for at least 3 years, which is the project duration, probably longer. Okay. Are we willing to take this risk? Now, our troops and fishermen in the West Philippine Sea are constantly harassed by the PLA. Are we willing to abet China and provide aid and comfort to this particular effort? Okay. What about our obligations to our only treaty ally, which is the United States? Okay. The thing that really makes us very suspicious is that EM Cuerpo, the private partner of the city, entered into another memorandum of understanding with Polichangda. And that memorandum of understanding is now being published. It's a notarized document. And if you look at it, both Polichangda and EM Cuerpo are governed by a very strict regime of secrecy and privacy. So their agreement is shrouded in mystery. Okay? So I'm going to give you a snip of that particular agreement. So if you look at this portion beneath the two, in between the two red lines, you'll see that both parties are governed by a very strict regime of confidentiality and privacy. Okay. Why the secrecy for a project this big? Then again, are we willing to take this risk? So this is a question that I'm going to throw at you, the audience, and to our representatives in the city. Are we willing to take this risk with this particular partner that we have chosen to undertake this particular project? Okay, I'm not even talking about the environmental cost or the legalities or the defect in the contract. I'm just throwing this back at you, this particular aspect, the security aspect. Are we willing to take this risk? Okay, so I'm going to end my presentation now. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer those questions.
All right, thank you, Sir Jay, for the very informative discussion. discussion, especially on the part about um, the Chinese intelligence law, as well as Polychangda in general, or Polygroup for that matter. Polychangda being a subsidiary of Polygroup, which was, according to you, already banned in certain countries, in certain Western countries, for issues with intelligence. Did I get you correctly, sir?
They're not actually banned, they are blacklisted. Okay?
They've been blacklisted. That
They've
is
been
the more
blacklisted.
appropriate
It's
term.
not relating to intelligence, but it has everything to do with their dealings with authoritarian regimes. So they are actually selling arms to authoritarian regimes. And that is the reason why they have been blacklisted, and they are even flagged by Amnesty International.
All right, sir. Sir, we have a few questions here at the Q&A box. Let me just go over them one by one, if you are all right with it. Will you be ready now to answer some questions, sir?
Yep, absolutely.
Sir, I'll read to you the first question. The participant is asking, because you mentioned about Internet of Things, or IoT. So the participant is asking whether the community of Dumaguete and even the province of Negros Oriental is ready and capable to absorb 5G technology, as IoT refers to a system of interrelated, interconnected objects that are able to collect and transfer data over a wireless network without human intervention. The personal or business possibilities are endless. Is there a need for this technology in the city of Dumaguete and the province per se?
Okay, that is actually a very, very good question and a very valid one. Okay, so as far as I recall, our internet providers hasn't even mentioned about 5G. Okay, so Globe or Smart, they haven't even mentioned about 5G networks. Now, this city, the smart city, has promised to have 5G wireless communication networks. So who will be providing this network? Okay. But assuming that we will be having them, with 5G, it is very important that the vendor is very credible and reliable. It is also important, because of the nature of 5G, it is very important that the equipment that we will be using comes from a very trustworthy source. Unfortunately, whenever a Chinese corporation is involved, there is only one company, or probably two companies in mind, and that is Huawei and ZTE when it comes to 5G. And their track record is not very good. In fact, in the UK, there is an impartial study in the UK, and they found out that Huawei has several backdoors within their system that can easily be exploited, and that is the reason why they were banned in the UK. And that is really the danger here, because there is that mandate under Article 10 of the National Intelligence Law and Article 7 of the same law that requires all their corporations to assist in intelligence gathering. And they have no choice but to comply with that and use their own vendors, and that would be Huawei and ZTE.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, perhaps this is a follow-up question, or it's at least in a way related to the first question. Second question is, does a small city like Dumaguete have any secrets that are important enough to keep from China?
Dumaguete per se, I'm not sure about that, but as I've said, that particular location in the Tanian Strait would put Polychangda and China in general in a very, very strategic position to observe and lay out maritime assets, because that is very close to an archipelagic route that is constantly being used by the United States and other navies, that particular route that passes through the southern tip of Negros Island. So probably Dumaguete per se would probably not be a very, would not be a, at least within now, it wouldn't be of interest, but that particular location is, and that is a very, very crucial consideration that we need to take into.
So it's not necessarily Dumaguete, sir, in general, but it's a very strategic location as far as maritime considerations are concerned. For example,
Exactly.
you mentioned about the submarine routes, which were provided by the U.S., I believe. These were provided by official communications by the United States, sir.
Yes, yes. Before these countries can pass by that particular route, they have to ask permission from they have to ask permission from, I think it's the Department of National Defense and Foreign Affairs Department, that they will be doing innocent passage. And they've been doing that.
Mm-hmm. Sir, another question here, and it's also related to the first question. What are examples of intelligence-bound information that China may take through their networks? How will it possibly affect the people who use those networks?
Okay. If there is, as I've said, 5G is one. Okay. Now, as I've said, everything that deals with the internet is actually being gathered by intelligence networks. So if you listen to the news, they found it very alarming in the US that credit card companies have their records hacked. Okay. So you have credit card companies, or even those phone apps from your phone, from your Android or your from your iPhones. Those apps have countries or state actors or non-state actors have attempted to hack into the system and gather intelligence. Okay, so if you look at it from the onset, it might not seem to be very relevant. But if you look at it as part of the bigger scheme of things, then it could probably fit in. Okay, spending habits of the people. Okay, we might have a politician here in the city, and he might have a private transaction, for instance, and this could be exploited later on by a state or a non-state actor to compromise this particular person or a businessman, for instance. These are hypothetical situations, but it's very the possibility is very real. In fact, in the US, there is a congressman right now who now holds a very important position in the House Intelligence Committee. He has been targeted by an intelligence agency, and until now, so everything that deals with the internet is actually a target for state and non-state actors.
Sir, the next question is, well, it starts off by, of course, thanking you, sir, for the presentation. And the participant also mentions that it seems to her, at least, that the presentation which you provided is like a plot of an espionage movie or a James Bond movie. So the participant is asking how you can convince us that there is a likelihood that this will happen should the 174 reclamation be implemented.
Well, I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm just trying to present the facts. Okay, the facts are very simple. The facts: you have a Chinese company that will be undertaking very crucial very crucial task, and that would include laying out 5G communication networks. It is a Chinese company. It is also a fact by admission by no less than City Hall that this is now a subcontractor. Okay, and it is also a fact that you have a Chinese law involved, and that is the National Intelligence Law of 2017, which requires all Chinese citizens and organizations to comply, support, and cooperate with national intelligence efforts. Okay, if that happens here in the Philippines, for instance, if you have the AFP and writing a letter to Globe or to Smart or Dito and say, I want you to give me all the phone transaction of this particular person. Globe, Smart, or Dito, or whatever network can refuse, and they can go to our courts and enjoin the AFP from doing that for violating the Bill of Rights. But there is no similar provision in China, for instance. You cannot go to a Chinese court and enjoin Poli Chanda from revealing those information. No, Chinese courts are not independent like ours. Chinese courts are not answerable to the people. They are answerable to the Communist Party. So I'm not here to convince anyone. And it's up to you if you believe this presentation or not.
Okay, thank you, sir. And of course, related to that is another question, sir. And I'll just read it directly. Given the fact that the Poly Group is classified as a China arms dealer and a company 100% owned by Communist China, should not the AFP or the DOD be involved already in the consultation of this agreement between the city and the private proponent? The participant is basically asking for your opinion here, sir.
I'm not actually privy as to what's going on between the city and the national government. What I'm saying here is that the city shouldn't be dealing with this particular company given their track record. Okay, the city is the city government is composed of elected officials who are answerable to the people, to the voters. Okay, and that is basically their mandate to protect the voters, to protect the people from entering into these kind of transactions.
Okay. Sir, the next question is it involves geopolitics. So it reads, in the conversation of geopolitics, how should the US, one of our oldest allies, protect our shared interest of mutual defense in the Negros region?
Well, not probably with the Negros region, but probably with the Philippines as a whole. They are obligated to do that under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Okay, so any attack on any Philippine vessel, for instance, would enable us to invoke the provisions of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Okay, so if Negros Island would be attacked or invaded by a foreign power, or if any of our maritime or any of our ships or aircraft would be attacked, that would probably be within the ambit of the Mutual Defense Treaty.
And the next question, sir, is should the international community be informed about the reclamation project considering the security issues? Australia might be interested to know about these risks, or is it premature?
Well, I'm sure that by now they are aware of this. People from, if you look at our panelists, the panelists that we are having within the next couple of days, they are coming from other countries as well. Okay, and I know for sure that there are organizations that are keeping track of all these so-called Chinese investment areas. For instance, they tried to sneak in, they tried to build a deep water port in Sri Lanka known as Hambantota, It was a very expensive project. It was undertaken without any proper feasibility study, and because Sri Lanka couldn't pay for it, they ended up giving China a 99-year lease on that deep water port. So things like this are being monitored by international groups. So to answer your question, yes, Australia should be aware, and I know they are aware, or at the very least, there are Australian nonprofit organizations that are monitoring projects like this.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, let's go back a bit to the MOU, because a participant is asking about certain provisions or certain sections in the, I guess this is the subcontract agreement between EM Cuerpo and Poly Changda. So one participant is asking, sir, about in particular sections 1.5 and 8.2. What are the implications of these sections? So I'll just read to you the sections real quick, sir. 1.5 talks about the payments due to Poly Changda under the subcontract works may be sourced from this, may be sourced from the proceeds of the sale, mortgage, or of any financial transactions involving the property or any portion thereof, reclaimed by Poly Changda under the subcontract, or any other sources available to EMCI. So perhaps let's answer first the question with regard to section 1.5, sir. Again, this talks about the payments due to Poly Changda under the subcontract works.
That's a very interesting point, actually. Floyd, we are both lawyers, and we know that there is a constitutional proscription on foreign ownership of lands. I'm very sure that particular provision hasn't been amended yet, and that provision stays. No foreign corporation are supposed to own foreign land. Land is not supposed to be owned by any foreign corporation. Now, if you look at that particular provision, that is one easy way to skirt that constitutional proscription. Okay, so there could be a loan, and the collateral could be reclaimed land. Okay, now what happens if the debtor, the mortgagor, fails to pay, and the mortgagee would now come knocking and foreclose on those particular, enforce the guarantee. Okay, so that is an indirect way of acquiring ownership over Philippine land, which is strictly prohibited by the Constitution. And I think that is very, very suspicious, and we should all be aware of this. Okay, and may I also point out that this is actually within the expertise of Attorney Golda Benamin, because. But yeah, that's a very important point that this viewer has pointed out.
And also, sir, he talks about the separability and arbitration clause. I'm sorry, I read the wrong provision earlier. 7.2 is about the separability again and arbitration. 7.2 reads, any dispute arising out of or in connection with this MOU, including any question regarding its existence, validity, or termination, shall be referred to and finally resolved by arbitration in Singapore, in accordance with the arbitration rules of the Singapore International Arbitration Center, for the time being in force, which rules are deemed to be incorporated by reference into this clause. The number of arbitrators shall be 3. So this basically talks about arbitration, and of course, we all know the history of the Philippines when it comes to arbitration. I believe the most recent one was when our president called out, the arbitration in which the Philippines basically lost, and we were ruled to pay millions to, I believe it was for water concessionaires in Metro Manila. This is what comes to mind, at least when we talk about the most recent arbitration cases. So what are your thoughts on this, sir? Especially that it's referring to arbitration in particular in Singapore.
All right. So since they have that venue for these particular provisions is being fixed in Singapore, that means it's beyond the ambit, beyond the coverage of Philippine laws. Anything goes. Okay. Now, as to whether they can enforce that provision on the Philippines, that's another issue. But the fact is, the tribunal in Singapore are not bound by whatever is stated under Philippine law. We can say that under Philippine law, foreign corporations are prohibited from acquiring ownership of real property, but that may not bind that particular tribunal. Okay. And of course, if we opt not to comply, then of course that would affect our international standing, because we are part of a community of nations. And if we don't comply with a foreign judgment, and that would also have an impact on our standing in the international community. So that's also a very important point. Now, allow me to expound on this, which also affects national security. Okay. So I think most of our viewers at this point know about the concept of a Chinese death trap. Okay. So China basically has a project, and it is known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay. Under the BRI, or basically which is the acronym for the Belt and Road Initiative, they offer loans, and it's very easy to get these loans. Okay, but because of the exorbitant fees and high interest, most of the countries are unable to pay. And because of that, Chinese companies are known to foreclose on assets and take possession of this particular project. And a very good example is that deep water port in Sri Lanka, the Hambantota deep water port. And I've also heard that there's also a high-speed railway somewhere in Africa that has been built without proper feasibility study, and then China will be having a stake in it as well. Now imagine if we have a similar project here in the Philippines, okay, with Chinese corporations or the Chinese state foreclosing on an unpaid obligation, and that would definitely have an impact on national security, because that is basically a real estate that is just like they're saying 30 meters away from our shores.
Going back to I think you raised a very good point earlier, sir, when you talked about arbitration, especially with regard to our standing in the international community, because of course we've been trying to at least enforce the ruling with regard to the South China Sea arbitration, in which we won. So our standing will definitely take a hit, of course, if we don't adhere to whatever is ruled in the event that there is in fact arbitration. Although I would also like to point out, sir, that arbitration, this correct me if I'm wrong, but the MOU of course covers only Polichangda and EM Cuerpo. So arbitration in that subcontract agreement is basically between them, correct?
Yes, that's exactly. It doesn't bind the city, but again, that's an enforceable document. It's a contract between the contractee, our contractor, and its subcontractor. So as to how it could affect us, we don't know. They could go to arbitration, then we could end up with a foreign judgment that is that Polichangda would like to enforce under our courts. As to whether our courts would honor it, I mean, we don't know what would happen.
Okay. Now, sir, since we're talking about Polichangda, can you talk to us about its parent company, Poly Group, and why it was, or can you give us a brief discussion as to why it was blacklisted by the US as well as other countries?
Okay.
Before we proceed to the further topics.
For other countries, like for instance, the United States, they have a law. They have a law that prohibits corporations from supporting regimes that are basically violating human rights. Okay, And there are some countries with authoritarian regimes that have been violating human rights. They have been engaged in ethnic cleansing or other violations of international law. And Poli Changda has been supplying arms to this authoritarian regime. And that is the main reason, why it has been blacklisted by the US and other, sorry, it's not Poli Changda, but Poli Group Corporation, that it's been blacklisted, okay? So it's basically, when a country, when a corporation is blacklisted, it doesn't mean that it's banned, okay? It's just that all its transactions undergo a very strict scrutiny, okay? And that is basically happening with Poli Group Corporation. Basically, what, as far as the United States is concerned, all its transactions are being examined. Each transaction is being examined. So because of that particular record that it has been supplying arms to authoritarian regimes, and those arms are being used to repress human rights. I mean, most liberal democracies have these particular laws. The US, Australia, the UK, they have similar laws on this matter.
Sir, since we're talking still about Poli Changda, as I was browsing through the comment section on Facebook Live, I noticed a very, very interesting question. I won't read the name, but the question reads like this. First of all, he thanks you for a very interesting discussion. And he asked, what if a US-based company, which is also equipped with advanced technology, will commit to the project? Should we have the same level of concern, or is our objection due only to the participation of Poli Changda? What are your thoughts on this question, sir?
Well, any foreign involvement should always be scrutinized, okay? But the difference between an American company or an Australian company or a Canadian company with a Chinese company is this. American, Canadian, Australian, and companies from liberal democracies, they basically come from a rules-based country, okay? So if their countries are violating the law, we can always go to their courts, and their courts can enjoin the action of their corporations. Okay, like for instance, the U.S. The U.S. have a very strict law that prohibits their corporations from engaging in corruption. Okay, so if an American corporation, for instance, has been caught giving bribes to a foreign country, to officials of a foreign country, that particular officers of that particular American corporation could be prosecuted under American law. Okay, so that is the main difference here. We can always go to an American court or a British court or an Australian court and seek an injunction or an injunctive writ against the actions of their own company. Or if the CIA, for instance, or GCHQ for England, if their security and spy agencies are involved, we can always go to their court and seek an injunctive writ against those courts. That is not possible with China. You cannot go to a Chinese court and ask for an injunction to enjoin the Ministry for State Security or to enjoin Poli Changda. No, it won't. The main difference here is that with China, the accountability is not to the people. The accountability of the People's Liberation Army, for instance, the accountability of their courts, the accountability of their spy agencies is not to the people, but the accountability is to the Communist Party. Okay, that is under their constitution. That's very clear. The People's Liberation Army, for instance, is not the army of the Chinese people. It is the armed group of the Communist Party, and that is basically the difference between dealing with a corporation from a country like that and a corporation from a liberal democratic country.
And also, sir, if I may add to that, I think we should also highlight the fact that there's a long history of cooperation, at least because it was the US which was given as an example. There's a long history of cooperation between the United States and the Philippines, although admittedly, it has not always been smooth as far as our relationship is concerned. Still, we cannot discount the fact that there is history there
Yes, exactly.
with regard to the Philippines and the United States.
It's not a
Yeah.
perfect relationship, but it is a relationship to start with.
Sir, there is another question here. This again talks about the MOU and the JVA, and it reads, considering that the City Council has already passed a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into or sign the MOU/JVA, and given the magnitude of the national security implications of the proposed reclamation project presented tonight, what should the City Council do moving forward? I believe this was already touched upon by Attorney Golda in her presentation, but could you care to share your opinion on the question asked today, sir?
It's actually a very good question. Okay. Obviously, we are not the City Council. We are not, none of us basically know what's in the mind of the mayor right now. But I mean, with the risk involved, this particular risk, and you compare it and you correlate it with other issues as well, there's basically, it's illogical for us to move forward with this particular project.
And perhaps related to that, sir, is, well, he phrases his question in this manner. He talks about China having a long history of expansion and domination, and that they are very good at the long game. He points out that Representative Swalwell of the US seems to have been targeted years ago, for example, and Sri Lanka and various African countries now find themselves on the short end of the stick. I think this refers to some of the Chinese debt traps, which you yourself mentioned tonight, sir. Do we really have any chance of pushing back on Chinese forays like this, or does it mean constant vigilance on our part? How can we, the people, even do this?
Well, to start with is we don't allow this particular project right at our doorstep. Okay. As I've said, I'm not here to touch about the legal aspect, but I was just reading through the terms of the MOU/JVA, and there are very onerous conditions. Okay. In the security aspect, I'm really worried about the fact that they just considered 5G communication as part of the ancillary businesses of this particular smart city, and basically within the exclusive control of the private partner. I'm really worried about that. There are other legal defects in the contract that I won't venture to touch that because I'm not here to speak about that. But as far as the security aspect is concerned, I'm very worried why the city will have no oversight. At the very least, the city will have no oversight as far as those wireless communication networks are concerned. If you look at it, if you look at the MOU, the city will the only share that the city has is that they're sharing the profits, not the management. There's no oversight on the part of the city.
Okay. Sir, another question from our Q&A box. Again, it's also related to the first question, the last question which I asked. First of all, he mentions that this seems to be placed at the back seat in the discussions regarding this reclamation. So the participant is asking what you can highlight to the public so that this will be something that will really call the public's attention. This is especially, the participant refers specifically to those who are unbothered by environmental catastrophes that loom.
Okay. It's not that I'm not bothered by environmental issues. It's just that I'm not here to speak about them. Now, as far as the security aspect is concerned, this is what I'm trying to say. A Chinese corporation is required under Chinese law to aid their own intelligence services. Okay? And Chinese corporations have been banned in other countries because of this particular provision, that all Chinese corporations have no choice but to comply with that particular directive, that they are to support intelligence efforts. Okay, so that's one. And then you have a Chinese corporation. And then that Chinese corporation is doing very critical work that could impact the security, not only of the city, not only of the country, but of our alliance with our allies and partners are concerned. Okay, so you have a Chinese corporation undertaking those critical tasks. You have that law that requires that Chinese corporation to aid their intelligence services. And lastly, you have a Chinese corporation whose parent company actually doesn't have a very good track record. So there are 3 points that I would like to point out, and if I could probably shorten my presentation, those would be my 3 concerns that I need to highlight.
Okay. Now, one participant just wants to share some information because we touched upon the section 1.2, 1.5. I believe it was section 1.5 of. Let me check for a bit. Yes, 1.5. This talks about 1.5 basically talks about payments due to Polychangda. A participant would like to inform the public with regard to a most recent case. This is a July 7, 2020 case. This is Parcon Song versus Parcon. The Supreme Court basically ruled that a foreign mortgager may possess property for 5 years after default and for the purpose of foreclosure. However, it may not bid or take part in any foreclosure sale of the real property. So this basically supports your argument earlier, sir, that this could, in fact, although we know for a fact that the Constitution prohibits foreign ownership of lands, this provision can, in a way, perhaps circumvent the constitutional prohibition. What are your thoughts on this, sir?
Well, I would like to thank the sharer of that particular view. Well, basically, she has said it all. As I've said, there is a danger that the constitutional proscriptions, the constitutional provisions would be skirted, if not avoided, would easily be avoided by disguising those mode of acquisition from purchase to probably enforcing a loan security, for instance.
Sir, another question here. A participant is asking, should the proponents of the Smart City project withdraw from the steps they have undertaken? What would be the impact on this withdrawal to the city of Dumaguete? Is the contract already binding, or is it too late to withdraw? Again, this delves more on the topic discussed by Atty. Benjamin, but of course, you may want to share your points of view on this matter.
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but let me tell you this. If the MOU was signed and if I will be advising EM Cuerpo, I will definitely bring an action for specific performance. So a good first step would be not to sign the MOU. If you look at the MOU, it is titled as such, but if you look at it, I mean, Floyd, we are both lawyers. When we look at the MOU, we could basically say that the rights and obligations and the conditions for exercising those are spelled out. And yeah, a good first step would be not to sign it. Because if I will be representing EM Cuerpo, and then later on there would be a change in the, let's say the change in the opinion of City Hall, my first task would probably be to sue for specific performance. So those are my only thoughts on that. I don't want to venture into it because I think that has been properly expounded to by Attorney Golda Benamin.
Sir, there's also a question here about whether or not we've heard any reaction from the US regarding this potential strategic breach. What about our own government? Have you heard, first of all, sir, from the US with regard to this project? Has there been any reaction?
No, there won't be an official reaction from the US or any other country for that matter. They will not be giving any particular reaction because that would be an interference in the sovereign and domestic affairs of a particular state. Okay. Now, for this particular project, I haven't heard of any reaction as far as security is concerned. It mainly deals with the environment and the environmental impact and the social impact, not more on security. But as far as official government reaction is concerned, for instance, you won't be hearing anything from the US Embassy on this particular matter, and they would just defer to the sovereign will of the Filipino people and probably the actions of the Philippine government.
Sir, given the strategic location of Dumaguete in particular and Negros Oriental, and the fact that, according to you, the US regularly uses this route from Guam when they are on their way to other Asian countries. There's a question here which will delve basically into speculation, but again, given your discussions with Polly Changda and the security concerns, the participant is asking if it is possible that Polly Changda initiated this proposal and not Ian Cuerpo. What are your thoughts on this, sir?
I will be speculating if I would be answering that. I'm not in a position to answer that, but what I can say is this: if you look at Article 10 of the National Intelligence Law of China, it requires their spy agencies to constantly evolve and constantly seek ways to gather intelligence. And if you're a keen observer of these things, you'll know that the Ministry for State Security and other Chinese spy agencies, they are very aggressive in doing this. And yeah, they're very aggressive, and they are constantly finding ways to gather intelligence and infiltrate societies and governments. For instance, one of the viewers has mentioned that particular American congressman, and that's true. That's true. That particular congressman was compromised when he was still a city councilor, for instance. So China played the long game. It was even, some would even say it was a honey trap operation. It was a lady, a female Chinese intelligence operative was involved, and yeah, they're one of the most aggressive spy agencies nowadays.
So there are actually no more questions, but there are a lot of statements and reactions to your presentation, sir. So I'll just read through them one by one, and maybe you can give us, if it has not been discussed yet, maybe you can also give your opinion on the statements made by our participants. Would that be all right with you, sir?
Yep, sure, absolutely.
First one is, thank you, Sir Jay, for a very comprehensive lecture on the national security threat, i.e. smart city reclamation. The lecture would definitely give pressure to the opponents to withdraw whatever steps they have undertaken from this reclamation project. I hope the proponents of the reclamation project are watching right now. This will help them discern whether to pursue with the reclamation project or not. perhaps in relation to this, sir, do you have any plans of? I understand that the city council has been entertaining letters from citizens of Dumaguete to speak about their objections or whether or not they are pro or against the reclamation project. The city council has, in fact, entertained regular citizens. Would you be willing to at least speak to the council, sir? Perhaps to talk about the security issues?
Well, as a resident of Dumaguete City, like you, Floyd, and me, we have friends. Okay, so I'd rather just try to convince, friends, and some of them are in the council. Try to engage in a you know in a healthy discussion about this topic. But as far as speaking to the council is concerned, I think Attorney Golda Benjamin has basically she has done well. She has done a great service to the city, and I think yeah, she has already done what needs to be done as far as the council is concerned.
And in relation to that, sir, a participant asked, how will you convince the mayor about the security risks of the Dumaguete City 174 project? And because he believes that the opposition is just fear mongering, how will you put across this message of security risk to the masses?
Well, I don't need to convince the mayor. Actually, he is a smart man, and he actually has made up his mind on this. But again, I would go back to the very, very clear provisions under which Chinese corporations, under which they operate. They operate. They are under that directive under the National Intelligence Law that they have no choice but to comply. And are we willing to risk having a corporation like that with that particular track record undertake such crucial task for the city rather?
Sir, there is another question, although this does not necessarily concern the topic which you have spoken about this evening. However, since I think this is probably because you are a lawyer, sir, and this is probably why the participant is asking you this. So if you will just humor me, sir, is the unsolicited proposal legal? Can a city enact any ordinance that is contrary to our national law?
Well, one of the first things that we learn in law school is that we know that a city ordinance can never supersede a national law. Okay, so there is obviously there is the hierarchy of laws, and we will have to follow that. As far as the specific legality of this particular project is concerned, I don't want to delve into that, but hypothetically, I can say that if an ordinance contravenes the provision of a national legislation, then that particular city ordinance will have to be struck down.
All right. So I don't think there are any more questions relating to the topic, sir. Again, there are quite a few statements with regard to Polichangda, as well as certain certain information with regard, which basically relates also to what you talked about this evening, sir. So I'll just read through them. One participant points out that in 1996, Poly Technologies illegally imported 2,000 AK-47 assault rifles into the US. And then another statement reads that Poly Technologies is China's biggest exporter of arms to war zones in the Sudan and Zimbabwe. Poly Technologies is, of course, another subsidiary of Poly Group, the parent company, sir. Okay.
That's very concerning about the Poly Group Corporation is that it's actually a state secret. some media article, I mean news articles would say that it's actually a state secret as to the total extent of their operations, and they obviously operate under subsidiaries. Now, let me just give you an example. Like Huawei right now is basically one of their top executives is undergoing trial now in Canada to be extradited to the United States because of possible violations of sanctions between the United States enforced sanctions against Iran, and the United States charged that particular executive of violating those sanctions. And the defense interposed by Huawei is that they did not breach those sanctions because it was undertaken by a different corporation. So it's actually like this. Polygroup Corporation is very savvy with regards to making their portfolio so diverse, and they have a number of subsidiary companies. But actually, we all know that these subsidiary companies are actually taking cue from the Polygroup Corporation, and basically that goes all the way back to the Chinese Communist Party.
Sir, a question just came in, and this pertains to the mayor and the councilors who voted to allow this agreement, for this agreement to happen. So the question is, given the immense impact to our national security, can the mayor and the councilors who voted and allowed for this agreement to happen be charged later on for treason?
For treason, no, they can't. We are both students of law, Floyd. We studied criminal law, both of us, but we know that treason can only be committed in times of war. That's under Article 114 of the Revised Penal Code. So there's no chance that any of these people can be charged with treason. It's unlike,
but I think Attorney Benjamin has pointed out that there are actually possible violations with a different law, and that is the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act.
Yeah,
I think that was
different legislation. Yep, yes, probably yes. And we should
definitely not for treason, because as you said, we are not, first of all, in a time of war, so there is nobody can be convicted for treason if there's no war that the Philippines is engaged in. I believe that is the last question, sir. So if there are no more questions, I guess can you give us your final thoughts, sir, on this reclamation project, and of course your topic for tonight, its impact on national security, as well as geopolitics.
So to wrap it up, again, if I'm going to wrap it up, it's very simple. We have engaged a company that has a contract with a Chinese corporation. This particular Chinese corporation is obliged under Chinese law to support national intelligence efforts undertaken by Chinese spy agencies. Okay. This particular company is a subsidiary of another Chinese company with a very shady reputation. And then we have entrusted this company with a very critical task of laying out very sensitive 5G infrastructure. And we have given this particular company another, we have placed this company in a situation where it can observe the passage of ships and other maritime assets that is passing through that particular route close to the Tanyon Strait. And so those are my 4 points. The national intelligence law, the critical nature of the 5G infrastructure, the strategic location involved, and the perfect cover that we will be giving a Chinese corporation at the behest of their own government to provide intelligence to their own government. So those are the things that I would like to point out. And I thank you, and I thank the Rotary Club and the Dumaguete Lions Club for giving us this venue.
Okay. So thank you very much, Attorney Nakao, for a very insightful discussion on the geopolitical and national security implications of this proposed reclamation project. Now, before we formally end tonight's learning event series, a few announcements. So tomorrow, August 4, another installment of this series will take place, and the guest speaker for tomorrow is Dr. Kent Carpenter, who was an expert witness in the South China Sea arbitration case, and he will discuss extended impacts of island building and reclamation on marine environments. On August 5, or on Thursday, the 5th installment, and it will discuss the geological impact. And the speaker will be Moses Alcala, who is a licensed professional geologist and site remediation professional. This learning event series will also continue up until next week. And on August 9, that will be Monday at the same time, 7:30, Mayor Felipe Antonio B. Remolio has kindly obliged has kindly said yes to the invitation sent out by the group. So the Mayor Felipe Antonio B. Remolio will be given a chance to speak about his point of view with regard to the reclamation. So stay tuned for that. And also on August 11, Dr. Wilfredo Licaunan, the Center Director for Shore at the De La Salle University, will talk about the human impacts and the current status of Philippine coral reefs. And finally, on August 12, Dr. Lori J. Raimundo, the Director of the University of Guam Marine Laboratory, will talk about coral reef restoration in general. So on behalf of the Dumaguete City Host Lions Club and Rotary Club of Dumaguete City South, thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you again tomorrow as we again talk about the extended impacts of island building and reclamation on marine environments. Once again, thank you and have a good night, everyone.